Bethany Haines reveals how her life fell apart after the horror of witnessing her father's execution online. Locking herself in the bathroom, Bethany Haines took out her mobile phone to watch a video that no person should ever have to see. The grainy footage showed her father David, 44, being brutally beheaded by ISIS's Mohammed Emwazi, aka Jihadi John. "I needed to know what Dad had gone through," explains Bethany, recalling that horrific moment. "Everyone told me not to watch it, but one night I just snapped. I felt so sick and was shaking by the end of it. That was my dad. The pain was unbearable." The story of David Haines' kidnapping and barbaric murder hit the headlines in September 2014. However, it was actually 18 months earlier, in March 2013, when the humanitarian aid worker was abducted alongside Italian aid worker Federico Motka by an unidentified armed gang in Syria. They'd been working at a camp for local people forced to flee their homes. The last time David's daughter saw him alive was in January 2013. "We had a movie night with ice cream, chocolates and brownies," remembers Bethany, who lives in Perthshire. "Then a few days later he texted me saying he was being posted to Syria. I was nervous, but I had to trust that he knew what he was doing. He used to be in the RAF, but had been doing humanitarian work since 1999 in places such as Africa and the Middle East, and he'd worked in Libya during the civil war in 2011, helping disabled people. Even though I had every confidence he'd come back, we both hated saying goodbye." Bethany only learned of her father's abduction 2 days after her 16th birthday in April 2013. She sensed something wasn't right when he hadn't called on her birthday and revealed her fears to her mum Louise, 47, who split from David in 2010. "No matter where he was in the world, Dad always rang to wish me happy birthday," Bethany says. "I was on holiday in France, but when I didn't hear from him, I knew something was wrong." When she returned home 2 days later, Bethany's mum told her that her father had been kidnapped. "I was relieved at first," she admits. "Knowing Dad wasn't dead made me so happy for a moment. Then reality sank in, he'd been abducted by terrorists. The worst part was feeling totally helpless. We were given very little information, so I could only cling on to the hope that he'd be returned safely." What made matters worse was that Bethany and Louise were ordered by the UK Foreign Office not to speak out about what had happened for fear it would interfere with rescue attempts. "All my friends were dealing with normal problems, like boys or exams, while I was harboring the secret that my dad had been kidnapped by ISIS," she says. "Everyone kept asking me why I was really down, so in the end I confided in a few close friends. Some refused to believe me, which was incredibly upsetting, but I suppose it did sound like something from a movie. This sort of thing wasn't meant to happen in real life." Stuck in limbo, Bethany struggled to cope. "I'd lie awake and prayed Dad would come home," she remembers. "I was terrified for him and would feel guilty that my life was carrying on while he was stuck where he was. Dad and I always had a great relationship, and while he'd do normal parent stuff like bug me about school, we always had so much fun together. I loved our movie nights at home and going shopping to Glasgow for the day. Whenever dark thoughts began to overwhelm me at night, I tried to remember the good times we'd had." But then, on September 13, 2014, Bethany got the news she'd been dreading: her father had been killed. Even worse, ISIS released a video of her father's execution to the world. "I was staying at my boyfriend's house at the time," she says. "At 1 a.m. the police turned up with my mum, and her face was red from crying. When they told me about the video, it just didn't sound real. I was so traumatized I didn't cry, scream or get angry. I hugged Mum, had a cup of tea, and went back to bed. It was just too much to deal with, and I felt as if my brain had switched off." Bethany admits it took weeks for her grief to take hold. "But when it did, it was like a freight train," she explains. "I'd be distraught 1 minute, angry the next. On top of that, strangers, and even friends, would tell me they'd seen the video online, and I'd feel outraged at the violation of my dad's privacy. That's when Bethany made the decision to watch the horrific film of her father's execution, in which he is seen being forced to kneel in an orange jumpsuit and say, "My name is David Cawthorne Haines. I would like to declare that I hold you, David Cameron, entirely responsible for my execution. It broke my heart how skinny and tired he looked, with big bags under his eyes," remembers Bethany. "I know it sounds weird, but even though the